Today we'll be discussing women in leadership, the troubling statistics of how few women executive leaders there actually are in the enterprise. And then we'll move on to interview Carolina Ruiz. She's the CEO for Latin America at Breyer & Thorn, an IT risk management firm that I am also the group CEO of. So if this episode is particularly timely or relevant to you, or even if it isn't, sit back, relax, and learn more about the challenges faced by women in executive leadership positions globally in this new episode of LeetSpeak.
Alyssa Knight.
That major hack attack against Sony. First, the studio's movies.
3 days after Target confirmed the hacking of payment information from as many as 40 million customer credit and debit cards.
Incoming message.
It's Friday, and that means time for another episode of LeetSpeak with Alyssa Knight, bridging the gap between all things information security, where we'll talk the latest vulnerabilities, threats, security conferences, malware and exploits, as well as interview CISOs and CIOs from around the world on the IT risk management topics that matter most. Alyssa Knight, one woman,
One mission.
one voice, in the world's foremost authority on hacking the cloud and Internet of Things. Coming to you unplugged and unleashed in this week's new episode of LeetSpeak
With Alyssa Knight.
First, I'd like to start off with some powerful yet troubling statistics on the number of women in executive leadership roles and women with seats in the boardroom. In a recent paper released by Deloitte, European countries continue to lead on gender diversity in the boardroom, with Norway, France, Sweden, and Italy among the countries with the highest percentage of women serving on boards. Regionally, though, countries in the Americas and Asia-Pacific region have progressed the least. With respect to women chairs, the three regions have approximately the same percentage: EMEA with 5%, the Americas with 4%, and Asia-Pacific with 4%. In the same Deloitte study of boardrooms of 49 countries, Deloitte found that only 12% of board seats are held by women, and 4% of those companies' boards are chaired by women across the same regions. Similarly, in a research study recently published by AAUW, for women of color, leadership opportunities in business are particularly elusive. Asian, Black, and Hispanic women make up 17% of workers in the Standard & Poor's 500 companies, while less than 4% are executive officials and managers. The further you move up the ladder, the fewer women there are. And before you think it's related to a lack of women in the talent pool, there is no lack of qualified women to fill these roles. Women earn the majority of university degrees at every level except for professional degrees, and more women are in the workforce today than ever before. There must be something inherent in the system, something systemic that's working against them. One such example is in a recent report on sex discrimination lawsuits published by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where it reported that 30,000 cases of sex discrimination in the last 5 years were settled or decided in favor of the person who filed the charge. But blatant sex discrimination isn't the only barrier to women. Hostile work environments, negative stereotypes about women in leadership, and bias also keep women out of the top spots. My guest today is Carolina Ruiz, the CEO of Latin America for Breyer & Thorn. Caroline worked her way up within the firm from her original position as a project manager. While women in the United States face a number of barriers to executive leadership positions, equal pay, and seats in the boardroom, women face an even greater challenge in developing countries such as Mexico. Welcome to the show today, Caroline. Can you tell us more about your background and how you came to work for Breyer & Thorn?
My background is a little bit diverse, if I'm honest. I started as an architecture major, in which I had 10 years in Columbia University and the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana at Mexico City. Upon my degree, I decided to move in the project management sector within my architecture major. That allowed me to try different things and basically multitask throughout my job. It was a happenstance that I ended up applying for a project management position at Breyer and Thorne. If I'm honest, at that point in time, I wasn't that familiar with cybersecurity, but I thought it was a new industry, and I knew it was going to grow exponentially, particularly in Latin America. So I thought it was a good opportunity for growth. Upon my entry to Breyer and Thorne, I found myself challenged on a day-to-day. And being in this environment that really harnessed just learning and opportunities for growth, I started to do stuff above perhaps the call of duty, if you will. And that's how I ended up in my position. I think it was through hard learning and labor that I ended up in this position, and ultimately ended up heading out the Latin American division.
How have your leadership skills developed while in your role? How do you continue to develop them today?
I think as I came into the role, and I feel most of people in leadership will attest to this, I had the sickening feeling of not being qualified for the job. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. But instead of sitting around and trying to just pass by, I said, well, if you don't know what you're doing, you need to find out what you're doing. So I went to the place that all of my generation goes to for answers, Google. So I started Googling about leadership, about the industry, about what I was doing on a day-to-day. And while I was doing this, I found great people like Simon Sinek, and found him and his videos very enlightening over how to deal with leading a team, making my team not only work but thrive. And I think that was really important. I know it's very cliche and a lot of people tell you this, but really reading from others it's a great way to earn perspective. I have a teacher once said that he asked us to read all these different words so that we can broaden our perspective. If we stick to one word, then our perspective is going to be that tightened. So the more that we read from different people, the more perspective that we earn around our world, different points of views. And that's really what has helped me in my position, I think. And oftentimes I still feel like the imposter in the role, but when I have those moments, I remind myself that I can't know everything, and that if I have a question, the best way to do is just ask a mentor, ask Google, ask YouTube, read books. And that's really what I've done throughout my tenure at Breyer and Thorne.
Okay, I have to ask, what's your favorite Simon Sinek book? He's got several. Let's see, it was Start With Why, True Leaders Eat Last. What's your favorite book from Simon Sinek?
I think the True Leaders Eat Last was one of my favorite. I actually started seeing Simon Sinek or hearing about Simon Sinek in YouTube, if you believe it. So I saw a really compelling talk in regards to leadership, and it was based on this book. And once I saw that, it was just, I'm hooked. It's like, I need to know more about this. And I think it was really different point of view on how to manage people. I think I've been, especially in Mexico, a lot of the corporate world is very structured, I want to say, I always tell this to you, Alyssa, sometimes I feel like in Mexico, we are a little bit disparate to the United States, and then we're potentially about 5 to 10 years behind. And so the corporate world tends to be a little bit more rigid as it manages hierarchies and such. And seeing Simon Sinek opened up this possibility that it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be the boss knows best. It could be that the boss doesn't know the answer. It's not a boss, it's a leader. It's not managing people, it's actually leading them to thrive. And I think that really opened up my eyes to this whole new panorama of things that I hadn't even experienced at that point.
Awesome. Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite books as well. I know. I think the first book I read from him was Start With Why, and talking about the golden circle and how that golden circle extends to everyone in the environment, in the enterprise, not just the executives, but all the way down to the janitorial staff of the organization. How would you describe the organization that you work in, Briar and Thorn?
So I think describing my organization might take a while, but being completely candid, I think one of the best things that we have going for us is our environment. Our work environment is really positive. And I'm not saying that because I'm the CEO of Latin America, but in reality, it actually pushes its employees. And I think I saw it with myself. I felt pushed and I felt motivated to move upwards and to learn more and to keep improving myself. So I think that's one of the key ingredients of this little machine that's Briar and Thorn. I think that it's a very collaborative effort. Everybody has an opinion, and if you don't have an opinion, you're the rarity amongst ourselves. And it's not as they can't, if they feel they can't be listened to. I actually encourage everybody to tell me what they're thinking, and I think Alyssa does the same, or you do the same for us. Every time that we're in a meeting, I want to hear what you're saying. One of the other things that I think it's exemplary is the majority of the executive team are women. I mean, it's all women, which is a rarity, I'm sad to say, in this time and age, that we are all women. And whether we like to admit it or not, it does serve a little bit more as, I would say, a tranquility for us. We know that we're not being objected to this stereotype of, oh, where you're going to be taking sick leave, or you're getting married, or you're going to have babies. I mean, all these things, we know that that's not the environment that we're in. So I think that's one of the greatest things that we have going for us. I think we're a small group, if you think about it. If you really think about it, the group that I oversee is about 15 people. And then it's very funny, but the majority are men. And all of them are extremely vocal, and they're bright. And I think that every time that I sit down with them, I get astonished as, you know what, you're teaching me new things. And that's something that always happens here. It's always thinking about one step further. What can we do better? What can we do better? And that really, really helps us in the end to make the best of this company.
What leadership strengths do you see Mexican women bringing to the enterprise? You know, I mean, obviously women bring a different dynamic in leadership, but what do you feel are the nuances that Mexican women bring to leadership roles that may be different, say, than an American female executive or a Black female executive, or what do you feel is a different dynamic that being Mexican brings?
I think ultimately in our Mexican culture, and probably I'm debunking a bit of a stereotype here, we've been perceived as this culture that is led by machismo, but something that is very intrinsically in all of our families, intrinsically woman, is at the fact that what my mom says goes. So the mother and the female is a great figure in our families. And I think that's the way that we've been raised. And if I talk to most of my guys, they're Mexican, they'll let you know that they're not scared of dad, they're scared of mom. And I mean, it was wonderful to see that. And I'm going to quote probably the least appropriate movie at this point, but I don't know if you saw Coco. I mean, seeing that is how it works. It is a subdued matriarchy, if you will. And I'll use this subdued because we do have that problem with machismo, and we do have that sense. But in the home, that's grandma's place. That's mom's place. And so I think having that and having the machismo component also allows us to already be very exposed to the difficulties in the workspace. And that helps us in overcoming it, because it's been something that's been going on as far as we've been Mexicans, to be a better part. So I think that's one of the key features, bringing that dynamic. Also, we are very family oriented. I think if you talk to any Mexican, they'll let you know family is first and family is last. So everything ends and starts with our family. So we understand the need to, you know what, your mom is sick. We understand the need to, okay, drop everything and go get her because she is sick. And that's what I think characterizes our culture. We're very home driven. We already have been facing this obstacles at home, and it's just a part of preparedness for the workspace.
How do you see leadership in a cybersecurity firm differently from leadership in other industries? Obviously, cybersecurity has its own nuances from other markets. How do you see leadership differing, if at all, in cybersecurity in an executive role than in other industries?
I think that leadership in cybersecurity really is distinguished by the fact that you are in crisis mode every single day. So we start at critical. That's really what it comes down to. So I mean, we have the nuances, and I know that other industries may have similar, like first responders, talking about the medical facilities, all that is very similar to what we do, and in that you're coming into a crisis and trying to solve it the best way you can. So really doing leadership in that environment is very tricky, if I'm allowed to say that word, tricky, for lack of a better word. I would say that because you're in this stress, you are forced to make at times decisions with very little information, if none, and make sure that you're mitigating the impact that it has on your clients and on your industry. One of the other things that makes it different is the fact that we really have to learn continuously. There are 0-day exploits coming up every single day, and having to prepare yourself for not only what we do know, but what we don't know is one of the biggest parts. So there will come times that I'm sitting in bed and just like browsing through my phone, and I see an article pop up over a new discovery or research on how to hack a router using LED lights. And immediately what I'm thinking is, oh my God, what happens when this becomes wild or is released into the wild, as we refer it, when an exploit is actually being used by hackers actively. So I start thinking about these things, because it's not an if and when they're gonna, it's a when they're gonna happen. It's not an if they're gonna happen. So I think that's really what differentiates us from other industries, is that crisis mode, that having to think 10 steps ahead, and that having to multitask while doing the everyday tasks that we have to do in leadership. So definitely a whirlwind.
So clearly, there's been instances where you came into the office at 7 a.m. and were faced immediately with crisis mode. Can you give us an example of one such experience and what it was like and how you navigated through it?
There's been experiences where I haven't gotten into the office at 7 a.m., but I've gotten into the office at mid-morning, or I got into the office at 2 a.m. because there has been an outbreak, if you will. I think one of the most notorious ones was when we were facing WannaCry. I mean, that was definitely something that hit the industry pretty hard. We were not only trying to respond to active threats, but we were trying to prevent threats from other clients. So our SOC was at the highest level of alert. We were all, for lack of a better term, paranoid. And so we kept on looking and having resources available. And that meant being up until 2 a.m. and making sure that if we detect something, we call our clients, and making sure that the things that we have detected are contained. So yeah, definitely a memorable occasion. Lost a lot of sleep over that one. But there's a lot of incidents that do happen. And most of these incidents, I'm afraid to say, are middle of the night. I remember configuring my phone to make sure that certain types of emails will generate an alert that will wake me up in the middle of the night, to make sure that if something critical happens, I'll be in the know and I'll be able to support my team through it.
So, in your opinion, you've read a lot of books on leadership. You've studied, the greats like Simon Sinek. In your opinion, what does make an effective leader, and what makes an ineffective leader?
I think that one of the main traits that identifies you as a great leader is it's communication. One of the things that I found is that when you communicate effectively to your employees, and communication is not a one-way street, and you have to communicate effectively to them, and you have to listen. Sometimes we misunderstand what communication means, and we often think it's about how I communicate, but no, half of it is listening. And I find that a lot of managers don't do that, as much of that. They don't listen to their employees, and sometimes, and I'll be frank. I mean, it's a learning curve, and I've been guilty of this as well, where you're either too stressed or too busy, and you stop listening. And there's always, thank God, there has been always a wake up moment for myself where it's, okay, you're not listening to them. They're trying to tell you something and you're obviously missing it. So I think that's really one of the trademarks of a great leader, is their ability to communicate effectively, to listen, and to action, to create actions based on those interactions. And I think from consequence, it means that an ineffective leader is most of the ineffective leaders that I've come across are people that either A, just want to be heard, and that happens a lot, I'm afraid to say, where it's what I say goes, and I know best. And I think that lack of humility of, you know what, you don't know everything. And I'd be very pressed to find someone who knows everything and has all the answers. They must be a wonder to behold. But if you really are frank with yourself, is you don't know everything, but you don't have to know everything. That's why you have a team. And that's how you need to query your team and ask them. And I just use query because that's what I do every day, talk about terms of computers. But you really have to ask your employees. You really have to ask your team and listen. When you stop doing that, that's where things start to break down, because they're not going to work for you. They're not going to push the extra mile if they feel that they're not being looked after. Why should I break my back if you're not even listening to the basics? So really, I think communication is key.
What advice would you give your younger self in going into a leadership role? Or, you know, some of the young women out there who are coming out of university, or, you know, coming out of, school, and they want to, you know, lead a company or become a CEO, or, you know, be an entrepreneur. What advice would you have for those young ladies, or even your younger self, before getting into leadership?
I think hindsight is always 20/20, so I have a lot of advice for myself. But I think one of the biggest things that I have learned in the position is adaptability. I think oftentimes we kind of focus on one path that we're going to follow, one way that we're going to lead, one role that we're going to have. And life doesn't work that way. Something's always going to be changing. Something's always going to ruin, quote unquote, the plans. And so you need to adapt. You need to be flexible in regards to that. So I think that was one of the major things that I learned the hard way. And I think the other portion that I would say to myself and to other young women would be, don't be so hard on yourself. I think oftentimes we are afraid to make mistakes, and we forget that making mistakes is really the only way that we're going to learn. And so I think when I was younger, I would be obsessed with the mistakes that I would make, and instead of looking at them as an opportunity for growth, I saw them as a deterrent of my abilities. And I just like to say to women in general, this isn't a perfect world that we're living in. So you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna fail. It's gonna go wrong a lot of times before it goes right. And just if you keep at it, that's where you get to tell the story about, oh, remember all those times that I did it wrong? Well, now I know what not to do, and now I know how to do it right.
Awesome. Yeah. You know, it's funny. And I think I've even gone to you and said this in the past, that it's almost like we, not just other people expect of us as leaders to know everything, but we expect that of ourselves to know how to do everything. And I know over the last few years of working together, one of the things that seems to resonate the most between us is, the feeling of, I have no idea what I'm doing, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And, I think leadership isn't knowing what you're doing. I think leadership is learning what to do. And that constant pursuit of developing yourself as a leader, developing yourself, developing your personality, continuing to develop yourself in all of these different areas, and productivity hacks, and, time management hacks, and, being a student. To me, leadership is really just learning along the way, knowing that you don't have all the answers, that it's okay to make mistakes, and look forward to mistakes, because, like you said, that's really the only way to learn. So one of the things being talked about right now in the media is the recent unfortunate suicide of Kate Spade, and how she, after selling her company to Coach, was found dead in her room, and, in a suicide. And it reminds me of kind of what happened to me when I sold my last company, Applied Watch. And, you just, for so many years, you just kind of build yourself up as this image of this particular person, and you almost lose your identity in the company. You're no longer yourself. You're the brand of the company. And when you sell that, all of that is gone. And I recall, after, this was back in 2007, 2008, where, I moved to San Francisco after selling the company, and I just fell into this huge depression. And, I became very suicidal. And, it's something that I think, and you spoke about this earlier, and I will, would like you to expound on that. But, it is very systemic in leadership, is to, is for leaders to be depressed. And, would like to have you speak more to this kind of, this feeling that you're almost expected to be perfect or godlike, and especially, and I feel like maybe even as women, there's an even greater expectation on us, where, as a woman in leadership, if you're, if you're trying to lead a group of men, and you're really tough on them with deadlines, or you're tough on them for expectations, instead of being leadership qualities, it's considered bossy. Or if you're upset about something, it's not for a legitimate, business reason. It's just because you're bitchy, So, I think as a woman, we face greater challenges in leadership than men, and those come out in those individual ways. Would love to have you speak to this New York Times article you referenced, more about, as well as just kind of speak to your opinions about this challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think the New York Times article really kind of opened my eyes to this feeling that I'm not alone. Basically, what this article stated is the infamous imposter syndrome, and this is something that happens in leadership a lot, whether you like to believe it or not, is that you have the sense that you are not worthy, that you are not capable or qualified for your position. You feel like, for lack of a better word, you are the imposter in your position. And I think this is systemic for men and women. I mean, ultimately, there has been a lot of articles around the increased rate in suicide, especially in people that are successful or are leaders or are brand, basically like Kate Spade was. She was the brand. And so what we've seen is the fact that you're being put in this position that you feel you can express weakness. So you can't say, you know what, I need some days off because it's been too much. You don't feel you have that luxury that some of your employees might have, because you are the boss. So you have to set the example and lead by example. And I know in Silicon Valley recently has been that shakeup in which a lot of these CEOs are saying, you know what, we are all suffering from the same things. We are all depressed, but I'm afraid that if I express my depression or really any sort of weakness, that my employees, the board, is going to think that I'm not fit to run a company. And so for fear of losing it all, we kind of keep it all inside. And so I think that's what we're seeing. And now taking that into account as a woman is, I think you're very much on point. Is add to the stigma of being a woman leader, you want to show even less weakness, because unfortunately, by stereotype, we are categorized as the weaker sex. So you're trying to portray yourself as this superwoman that is very strict. And I know I had these challenges before, even with my guys, and they're all great guys, but I do struggle with the sense of how tough is too tough, and what if I'm too lenient, they're gonna think that I'm too soft. What is the level of toughness that I need to represent before they think it's that time of the month? So really, it is a challenge that I would be lying if I say that I haven't thought about it. But I think, again, stating to that is really that mantra of, first, you're not alone in this. This is a systemic issue across leadership in the United States, and I'm pretty sure that in other countries that image that the CEO or the boss is infallible. That's not true. We're all human. At the end of the day, cut me, I bleed. It's simple as that. And as far as women goes, I think the second guessing of ourselves is really what brings us the problem in the first place. Because I think about it, I talk to my brother a lot, who is a great leader and has led a lot of people. And one of the things he told me when I was sharing my insecurities with him, well, I don't know what amount is correct for me to tell them how tough is too tough. He says, you know what's really funny is that I have never thought about that. I have never thought on measuring myself, if I think that is that second guessing, measuring myself and how I react to avoid any whiplash. So don't. If you feel that something needs to be treated in a certain way, then do. Don't second guess yourselves in the beginning or in the process. And it kind of made me wonder, and this, you know what? Yeah, we have been raised in very different stronus. I was thought to grow in. He was thought to grow out. And I think that really aggravates that sentiment of not being weak. Just one of the things I always encourage is, if you are feeling that you can't share your thoughts or your problems as a leader, you don't have to share them within your company, but there's other leaders that can help you. Mentoring is great. I have several mentors that when I'm stuck in a bind, I just message them or I call them. And I called you several times. You know what? I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know. Am I being too hard? Am I being too soft? And leverage those. These are your peers, people who are going through the same things and will ultimately help you.
No doubt gender equality in the highest of ranks will continue to be a pervasive issue as women continue to work globally to push the barriers to leadership and the boardroom out of the way. While some progress has been made, more needs to be done. But much progress can be made just by a single company deciding to change the demographics of its leadership team and boardroom like Briar Thorn has, where 76% of its leadership team are women. I'll end this episode with a quote from Malala Yousafzai, who said, "I raise up my voice, not so I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard. We cannot succeed when half of us are held back." Caroline, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.